Welcome back to Analysis, where we've been focused on events in Libya. Dr. Wafik Mustafa from the Conservative Arab Network is still with me in the studio. Wafik, do you think now that this has happened, that it will in some way mark a watershed? That ever since the NATO bombardment, the Hume's arms supermarket that turned Libya into, they've been unable to get the militias out of the equation. Are the elections likely to mark any kind of watershed, whether after the elections that might be less of the case?
I think it's going to complicate the situation in Libya because the grounds for election, if we want to say between brackets for democracy, does not exist. So we have to prepare the ground for election, for democracy, for trust, for reconciliation. People have to talk to each other because so far each group talking to a specific supporters, and there's so many television broadcasters, and it was which supporting each power side, the army, the air force, and so forth. A Muslim Islamist, if we use this phrase. So I think Libya needs more than that. Need preparing the ground for future sort of unity government in this country.
Okay. Mohammed Abdul Malik from the Libyan Muslim Brotherhood, do you think that there's a visible process at the moment in which the guns and the militias are going to get taken out of Libyan politics? Because that's what's at the heart of the instability in the country, isn't it?
Well, actually, I'm going to add another element to the discussion, and that is that the same guns that you want to take out of the picture are the same guns that are keeping us on the track towards democracy. If there were no militias, if the revolutionary forces didn't have weapons, today we will have been ruled by Haftar a long time ago. Just remember that the presence of these armies is what is keeping us on the track towards democracy. As for democracy, no one in Libya claims that we have democracy. We don't have democracy. We have freedom. What we have now is a lot of freedom. And it will take us quite a long time to reach democracy. It took France 80 years after the revolution. And it took Spain, with the help of Europe, 7 years to achieve democracy. So if we achieve democracy in 10 years, that will be a good thing. But we are working on our way. And I think that Libya, uniquely amongst the Arab Spring countries, is more capable of achieving democracy than any other country. And the reason for that is that no one single group in Libya has an outright majority, and therefore everyone can share in power. In Egypt, the Ikhwan has taken the majority, okay, and therefore everyone else felt excluded. And it wasn't in their benefit to have a democratic process, and therefore we've seen the coup. But in Libya, everyone can have a share. No one will rule outright, and therefore we have to sit down and talk together. Also, the presence of weapons is a deterrent, that we cannot use force for political gain, because everyone has force. Everyone can use force. And the question is not when Libya will go to war and civil war, but the question really is why hasn't it done so until now? And what we have in front of us, either we kill each other or we sit down and talk.
Okay, let me put some of those points to Rihab El-Hajj from the New Libya Foundation. And Rihab, I mean, that's the controversial point, really, that there's a kind of pluralism with guns is what's keeping Libya from falling into civil war, and that it's the pluralism with guns that will lead to a peaceful settlement. Do you buy that?
I do. Well, I do think that the fact that you do have several armed groups, I think the fact that you have an armed population is helpful when you don't have the rule of law. Because people can defend themselves in their own homes, in their own cars. So we see very little instances of violent crime. I think politically it creates...
So it's like the kind of Republican right in America's ideal society then?
Exactly. it's anarchy and utopia at the same time.
Yeah.
But I think from the political sense, it makes it very difficult to develop an army. Because everybody feels that balance is required in order to have some type of stability. I think the challenge is developing trust in the state or a decision maker in general, and that's where I think the role of civil society comes in. Because though the various parties cannot trust one another to make decisions on how the country moves forward, I don't think we necessarily need these elaborate bureaucratic state institutions that we've adopted from the Western democratic process. I think the horizontal leadership or democratic method can work very well for Libya. We don't have institutions, but we don't need institutions to create consensus. We have technology. We have SMS technology. We have internet technology. All we really need to do is to leverage our very small population and our relatively abundant resources and create means by which people can determine what they want moving forward through polling and through research, and to really empower that platform so that all the parties involved have a very clear vision and have a very clear mandate on what the public wants, and you create a consensus around contentious issues on how to move forward. But as civil society, we've been working with civil society to create offices of public consultation and offices of public information that when you present some of these solutions to decision makers, they see them as out of place and not really relevant in the very kind of emergency partisan dialogue that they're engaged in, because they're completely out of touch with the public. So one of our jobs is to say, actually an armed society isn't the solution. Consensus is the solution. And decentralizing the decision-making process is a much more modern kind of approach that Libya can take and has the capacity to implement right now.
Okay. Well, Wafiq, do you think this is plausible? I mean, you get the kind of image of a group of people stood in a circle, and each person in the circle has got a revolver pointed at the temple of the next person to them, and that nobody fires because the result would be carnage. But it's hard to see, even if that's a kind of mutually assured destruction stability, it's hard to see how you move beyond that to actually putting the gun away, isn't it?
You'll never move beyond this point, because gun is their strength, otherwise, because there's no trust. And I don't think Libya will go into civil war because it's too small to go into civil war. There's huge space of sand between cities, so it's easy to go back to Ottoman time of Walayat.
So do you think that I mean, and many people have raised this since the NATO invasion, do you think the sort of dismemberment of the country is likely?
Well, unfortunately, I feel sad to say so, yeah. I mean, if you look at Rahab, who she's speaking, she's a very great intellectual lady in Libya, but again, there are not many people like her speak on the ground. A lot of people carry guns and unregulated, and they're not willing to give up their guns. And if you could see, I mean, when we say carnage, there is a carnage in Libya. I mean, there's about 70 or 80 people were killed not long ago, a few days ago. 70 or 80 people for a small country is equivalent, say, to 1,000 people in Egypt. So it is a huge number. And then you had 30,000 people killed during the NATO bombardment. God knows, the country has suffered. And I can't see how it's going to get out without really heads knocking together and trying to really make sense out of it. They can use different organizations. When I said Libyans cannot do it themselves, what I mean is the country is too small and too vast land. So it does need outside support.
Mohammed, I mean, if there's a kind of, sort of mutually assured destruction stability of the kind that you were talking about, because everybody's got a gun, do you think that the central state is too weak to hold the country together?
At the moment, yes, it is too weak. But the central state is what we have. Everyone will have to accept the central state. As we accepted the National Transitional Council during the uprising against Gaddafi, we did not agree with it. A lot of Libyans definitely did not agree with the NTC at that time, but it was the only thing that kept us together, that kept our unity, that kept us focused on our target. And we do need a government, even a weak one. We do need a central body, a legitimate central body, even if it's a weak one at the moment, to keep us focused and united and to build the trust. The lack of trust was mentioned, and it's true. As long as there's no trust, we will keep pointing our guns towards each other. But the answer is to build the trust, to find it. It's going to be a slow process. That's fine. We've got nothing to lose, okay? So let's build that trust. It takes time, and definitely someone like Haftar doesn't help the scene by causing these irritations. We need to build the trust slowly, and that's what the past governments and the NTC definitely didn't do, because they responded to a foreign agenda of trying to disarm the Libyan people. That was something that the NTC and the governments that came after should not have asked, because no one would give up his guns. And obviously, the revolutionary forces were not recognized. Their effort to bring down Gaddafi was not recognized. The process of building the army was never started. Nothing was done. Nothing was being done seriously to gain trust and bring these different factions together. But the Libyan government at present is a weak one, definitely. The parliament is a weak one, because no one group has a majority inside the parliament. And that works fine for the moment, because the main thing at the moment is that we have a constitution. And if the body that's going to bring about the constitution represents all colors within Libya, then that's a good thing. Politically, it would be a weak body, because everyone is represented and no one has a majority. But because of the purpose of bringing us all together, no one would feel excluded, and therefore it is a good thing. And I think that slowly but surely we will come out of this mess. Slowly but surely we will achieve democracy.
Rehab, a cautiously optimistic view. Do you share it?
Sorry, you're speaking to me?
Yeah. And what Mohammed's saying is, is a kind of, guardedly optimistic scenario. Do you think that's likely?
Yes. Well, I think
I think we've lost her there. So, what do you think about that?
I think at the time, Mohammed, he thinks the time was with them, or with the revolutionary forces. I disagree. I think the time is against Libya, against the Libyan people. The more time you have in your hand, the picture in Syria will tell us. There's not the other models. Iraq will tell us. Iraq, the divided in Kurdistan, Iraq and Basra, more or less. So I think it's over-optimistic if we think the people are really united, because they're not united. They're all carrying armies against each other, and they're willing to kill each other at moment notice. So there's no trust. So how can you be trusted and can be united?
Okay, well, I think we've got Rehab's line back up now. Rehab, can you hear us okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's return to that question. Is there a cautiously optimistic way out of this?
Yeah, I do. And just kind of observing the trends of the last 3 years, usually there's some extremist factions or ideas emerge, and sometimes they are a solution to a problem. But oddly enough, the lack of trust or social capital that is kind of deterring progress is also the very same thing that forces people to come to consensus on issues before the country moves forward. So if people like Haftar or any other so-called leaders emerge and they're not able to gain the trust of the people and create consensus around major issues, the country doesn't move forward. That's meant that it's been a very slow process forward, but we have nonetheless been moving forward. The decentralization process, for example, has happened after 2 years of calls from federalists, but also because of the obvious need to trust, to rely on local governments, because they do know one another. They are communities that have some trust inherently built into that unit. So decentralization has been considered a wise move. And this past month, we've been going through local elections. Likewise, the General National Congress's mandate supposedly has been up, although technically they still are an elected body. And due to pressure from the street to replace the body, they have conceded and they've set up to have elections. And now we're moving elections forward. And likewise with the Constitutional Assembly, who has kind of responded to the idea that the General National Congress has been overpaid and now they're working as volunteers and have been doing a relatively decent job. I was lucky enough to be at their first consultation meeting at the beginning of this month. It takes a long time to reach consensus on some of these very contentious issues, but we haven't seemed to move forward unless we have reached consensus. So oddly enough, this lack of trust works both ways.
So, Wafiq, I mean, some of what Rehab seems to be saying there is that the process of building trust, some, elementary functioning of a constitutional state seems to be emerging. Do you agree?
Well, I think I'm reading I'm Egyptian, as you know, and I mix with all Arabs in London and everywhere. To me, there's a little bit of wishful thinking here because there's no model of federalism in the Arab world. There's no model of Arab country where it have islands attached without being separated in different states. So I think the thing is you have to have guidelines. Where's the guidelines? There's no guidelines. And particularly, we always think of time with us. And actually the other way around. Libya, I don't think, can stay for another year in the situation as it is at the moment. Particularly, each party is getting stronger and they're getting its own support from a section of the Arab world, because the Arab world is divided, pro-Muslim Brotherhood, anti-Muslim Brotherhood, pro-terror, anti-terror. So, and as well the world community, like a local country like Iran, like Turkey, like Europe, and the United States. So I think it's a very mixed up situation. It's not as easy to disentangle, in my view.
Mohammed, I mean, one of the things that's happening in Egypt, I suppose you could say, is that the old state is trying to re-cement its rule using the blood of the Muslim Brotherhood. Are you worried that something similar could happen in Libya?
I think what Haftar is doing is on the same lines, but the situation in Libya is totally different from Egypt. Because of the presence of arms, the people will not be peaceful in their demonstration. They will use guns. Unlike in Egypt, where the pro-Morsi people were peaceful because they didn't have access to guns. They couldn't face the machine of the Egyptian army. But in Libya, the situation is different. But they're using the same tactics. They're claiming that the people are with them. When there is no means of measuring the people are with whom. The only thing we have is the ballot boxes, and the vote went for the parliament rather than for anything else. So that's the only legitimate body that we have. But they're using the same tactics. So yes, I think there are people within Libya who want to duplicate the Egyptian example, but Libya is a different thing. And the Egyptian example will not work.
Okay, well, on that note, I'm afraid we're going to have to bring the discussion to a close because that's all that we've got time for. But do remember, you can follow us on Twitter and you can also follow Islam Channel Current Affairs on Facebook. So until the next time, good night.